She was radiant, fragile, and unstoppable until she wasn't. Jean Seberg's face defined an era of youth and rebellion, but behind that effortless smile was a life collapsing under surveillance, scandal, and silence. She wanted to change the world. Instead, the world crushed her. Why did one of cinema's brightest spirits become one of Hollywood's darkest tragedies? Let's go back to where her story really began. She came from the quiet heart of Iowa Marshalltown. Born in 1938, a Midwestern girl raised among cornfields, church choirs, and civic decency. Her father was a pharmacist, her mother a teacher. They believed in fairness, in simplicity, in small-town grace. And perhaps that's what made her so luminous when she first appeared on screen. She looked uncorrupted by the world. When Otto Preminger announced a worldwide search for a new Joan of Arc in 1956, Jean was barely 17. More than 18,000 girls auditioned. But Preminger saw something in her, the pale, angelic face, the sincerity in her voice, the raw courage of someone who didn't yet know fear. He told her, "You are Joan." She believed him. The press believed him. The world wanted to believe him. But faith can be cruel. St. Joan, 1957, became one of the most savage debuts in film history. Critics tore her apart, wooden, untrained, disastrous. One even joked that she was burned at the stake twice, once by the English, once by reviewers. Behind that ridicule was a terrified teenager who had been flown from Iowa to London, dressed in armor, and told to save a studio's investment. When the film flopped, Preminger publicly blamed her, calling her immature. She cried for days. Then she did something quietly remarkable. She didn't quit. Years later, she said, "I had two choices, disappear or start over somewhere no one expected." So she boarded a plane to Paris. Paris changed everything. In 1959, Jean met a young critic-turned-director named Jean-Luc Godard. He was planning his first feature, a gangster story that would invent the French New Wave. He cast her opposite Jean-Paul Belmondo in A Bout de Souffle, Breathless. That haircut, the striped shirt, the easy laughter on the Champs-Élysées, Jean Seberg, suddenly became the face of modernity. The film's handheld chaos, its jazz rhythms, its moral ambiguity, it all mirrored her. She wasn't acting, she was being. The world fell in love. Paris Match, Vogue, Life, every magazine called her the American girl reborn as French cinema. But behind that freedom was another kind of imprisonment. French producers wanted her as the eternal ingénue, the cool, detached muse. American studios wanted her back as proof they'd been wrong to let her go. She was living between languages, between industries, between identities. And in that space, the fractures started. She married the French writer and diplomat François Mauruy, who directed her in Time Out. For Love, 1961. The marriage was short, marked by jealousy and creative clashes. Friends recalled shouting matches over scripts, over control, over her need to be seen as more than the pretty American. When she divorced him, she was barely 22 and already twice burned by the men who shaped her image. But she kept working. Lilith, 1964, opposite Warren Beatty, Moment to Moment, 1966. A Fine Madness, 1966. The performances were fragile and mesmerizing. You could see both rebellion and exhaustion flickering behind her eyes. As the decade radicalized civil rights, Vietnam, protests, so did she. And that's when the trouble began. By 1968, Jean Seberg wasn't just an actress. She was an activist. She used her fame to support civil rights groups, Native American causes, and the Black Panther Party. In Los Angeles, she wrote checks, attended rallies, and sheltered activists who were being hunted by police. To some, she was brave. To others, including J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, she was dangerous. Declassified documents later confirmed what had only been whispered. The FBI opened a file on her in 1969, under the COINTELPRO program. Agents monitored her phone, her mail, her movements. They wanted to neutralize her, Hoover's own word, by destroying her public reputation. So they planted a story. According to internal memos, agents fed a false rumor to gossip columnists that Jean Seberg was pregnant with the child of a Black Panther leader. The story exploded across newspapers. Her husband at the time, novelist Romain Gary, was humiliated. Jean was 7 months pregnant when she read it. She went into premature labor. The baby girl, Nina, was born on August 23, 1970, and died 2 days later. Jean placed the tiny coffin on public display to prove the child's father was white. But the damage was done. How do you come back from that? How do you live knowing your government waged psychological warfare on you? She never really did. After Nina's death, Jean unraveled. She attempted suicide multiple times. Friends described her as sleepless, chain-smoking, drifting between apartments in Paris and Los Angeles. Romain Gary tried to protect her, but their marriage collapsed under the weight of grief and paranoia. He later said, "They broke her, piece by piece." She continued acting, but the sparkle was gone. In Airport, 1970, she played a stewardess the same year the rumor nearly killed her. The irony wasn't lost on her friends. She was playing calm professionalism while privately falling apart. She told one interviewer, "I am tired of being the symbol of something I never wanted to represent." In the 1970s, she married the filmmaker Dennis Barry and tried again for a normal life. She worked in small European productions, mostly under the radar. The fame that once suffocated her now seemed to evaporate completely. She wanted to raise her son, Diego, in peace, but the ghost never left. She was still followed by the press, still whispered about, still defined by tragedy instead of talent. According to those close to her, Jean began slipping into deep depression. She felt forgotten by Hollywood, betrayed by her country, and trapped by her own legend. She once told a friend, "You can be admired to death." The phrase would turn prophetic. In August 1979, Jean disappeared. She'd left her apartment in Paris, telling Dennis she was going for a drive. Days passed. Posters went up. Friends called hospitals, morgues, police stations. On September 8th, her body was found in the backseat of her Renault, parked on a quiet street not far from her home. She had been dead for several days. Next to her lay a note. "Forgive me, I can no longer live with my nerves." The coroner ruled it a probable suicide by barbiturate overdose. She was 40 years old. But as with so many Hollywood tragedies, the questions never stopped. Was it truly suicide or exhaustion, or despair induced by years of surveillance? Did she ever know how deeply she had inspired others? Romain Gary, still protective of her memory, took his own life a year later, leaving a note that ended with her name. Together, they became a symbol of love, destroyed by systems larger than themselves: celebrity, politics, power. Even now, her story feels unfinished. Breathless still plays in film schools, her image immortalized in black and white posters on dorm walls. She remains forever young, forever gazing into a future that never arrived. But if you look closely at those photos, the short hair, the half smile, you can sense the weight behind the lightness. What makes John Seberg's tragedy so haunting is that she wasn't destroyed by scandal alone. She was destroyed by belief. She believed cinema could be art. She believed activism could be pure. She believed love could survive exposure. And she lived at a time when each of those beliefs was tested and broken by forces she couldn't control. In an interview not long before her death, she said quietly, "I've always felt I was living on borrowed time. Maybe we all are." It wasn't self-pity, it was prophecy. She understood that fame isn't protection, it's magnification. It takes every wound and projects it onto the biggest screen possible. So what does her life tell us today? That even the most luminous faces can carry invisible bruises. That idealism without protection can be fatal. And that sometimes the cruelest spotlight isn't from a camera, but from a system determined to expose rather than understand. Years later, the FBI admitted its role. In 1980, newspapers published redacted memos proving the smear campaign against her. The agency's only statement: mistakes were made. No apology to her family. No restitution, just bureaucracy closing ranks. It was an eerie echo of St. Joan, the film that began her career. A young woman condemned by the establishment for daring to believe in something. Her son, Diego Gary, spent decades fighting to preserve her memory. He said, "My mother was killed by lies." In 2019, the film Seberg, starring Kristen Stewart, reintroduced her story to new audiences, showing the toll of government harassment on a woman who wanted only to be free. But even that version can't fully capture the quiet horror of losing a child because of a rumor, or the slow corrosion of trust that follows. If you watch Breathless today, you see more than cinema history. You see innocence before betrayal. Every laugh, every glance toward the camera feels like a ghost waving back at us. She didn't just act in the French New Wave, she embodied it. Spontaneous, questioning, doomed to fade too soon. So perhaps the real tragedy isn't that John Seberg died young. It's that the world learned nothing from her death. We still romanticize breakdowns, still chase authenticity until it cracks, still confuse visibility with validation. Jean's life reminds us that fame without mercy is a form of exile. And yet, there's another way to see her. Not as victim, but as visionary. Long before celebrity activism became fashionable, she risked everything for justice. Long before Hollywood talked about mental health, she lived its consequences. Long before feminism reached mainstream headlines, she fought quietly, imperfectly for the right to be herself. She may have lost the battle for peace in her own mind, but she won something rarer. Truth. The kind you can't rewrite with headlines or propaganda. The kind that lingers when the film ends and the lights come up. The final irony? Jean Seberg, the woman hounded for her politics, became immortal through art that celebrated freedom. Breathless ends with Belmondo shot in the street, dying as Jean looks down, uncertain whether to flee or mourn. It's a freeze frame that feels eerily like her own life beauty paused between guilt and liberation. If you've made it this far, remember this. Behind every icon is a human being wrestling with invisible wars. Jean Seberg's tragedy isn't just about one actress. It's about what happens when empathy disappears from fame, when ideals become weapons, when truth is lost between governments and gossip. She once said, "Money, fame, love, they come and go, but fear stays." Maybe that's the lesson she left behind. That courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to keep believing despite it. And if stories like Jean's move you, stay with us. Because history isn't just about the legends who lived, it's about the ones the world forgot to protect.